a lot.
Yeah, so am
And even if I hold the same values from now until I die, and my ideas, even if my ideas stay the same the whole time, my politics will still change to fit the changing stances that any given political thing like actually fits to in the outside world. But is that what you want to talk about, or do you want to pick an actual prompt?
I had this, a couple weeks ago, I had this conversation about like the 2000s. Can't remember what brought this on, but I feel like the 2000s were like...
Let's see if I can remember this.
Okay.
This the last time we were unconscious.
It was the 2000s were the last unconscious decade. Because it was like sort of modern, but at the same time, it was like the first time people, or there was like sort of like the last time in the modern world where people were performing without ever considering that they might have an audience. And it was like a weird time.
See.
Because it was still like modern and very postmodern even in some sense, like very disconnected from like any particularly deep roots, but it was like this weird fun carnival time that was done. It's like it's so easy to forget how people used to make YouTube videos for fun.
Yeah.
Without ever thinking about being a YouTuber. And that was, I just think the 2000s was an extraordinary decade because it was like having the power of the internet without the self-consciousness created by the internet. And it was a very interesting, weird time to be alive, to go to high school.
I'm thinking immediately of Obama starting the U.S. involvement in Yemen and helping the Saudis wage war in Yemen. And
that was like in the, that was like 2013, 2014, wasn't it?
I don't even know what years Obama was. I associate him with the odds.
Yeah, he was 08. Obama kind of was like the capstone of the aughts in some sense. He was the bridge.
Oh, does that mean Bush was everything before 08?
We've just black holed that memory. that time has been, yeah. Back when that was back when it was just like terrorists. Everything was terrorists.
Yeah, it was a new McCarthyism.
Yeah.
That's the Red Scare thing, right?
Yeah. That's the OG Red Scare. Yeah.
Yeah. So we were unconscious of a lot of things, is what I mean to say. And it's readily available now. For example, I know more about Yemen and our changing yet pretty much constant support of that massacre throughout the time of the war, from administration to administration. Like, I know about that now because of the kinds of uncensored information that are available still even on YouTube, without even like trying very hard to look for it. You can find out a lot of stuff that politically would be much more convenient to keep unconscious.
Can you imagine if YouTube was a big thing in like 2003? How many calls for censorship there'd be about videos that undermined the American war effort?
Well, there was a long time of catch-up. So if it was big back then, I think it would still be like new back then, though. And and the bureaucracy wouldn't know how to leverage things yet to censor.
So you're seeing this kind of like lag effect, where you have new technology that creates a kind of space that's uncontrollable for a while.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And now it's starting to get pretty controlled. It's I spent a few days. I maybe spent like 7 days being concerned about Joe Rogan last week, because now he's straight up being censored, and Spotify has taken off maybe like 5 or 6% of his episodes are deleted now, and that's really bad. I spent 7 days being concerned about that until I was like, Joe Rogan's got to reap his own karma for his own weakness. And if he falls, then that's a big tree that now is, all the sunlight that tree was getting is now gonna seed all the saplings that he helped create.
Yeah. I think it's pretty interesting to see how, like, it just makes me, my takeaway from that whole Joe Rogan thing was that, like, it's pretty crazy how much of a threat he seems to pose, that I didn't even really quite understand how threatening he seems to people who, you know what I mean?
You didn't listen to the McCullough podcast with him. You did?
I did listen to that one, yeah.
That was...
Yeah.
That was the first true words I'd heard out of a doctor's mouth since this thing started.
Yeah, I
think...
think...
And partly because in the first 6 months, no one knew anything true yet. Yeah,
I just on a level of, like, you know, because there's a lot of information out there that's counter to the narrative, but there's no guarantee that people are really going to be convinced by information, even if it's presented very convincingly. I think it's almost like a challenge to authority, where it's not that what we're afraid is. It's not like the people who are pushing a narrative are, the thing that they're afraid of is not that people actually be convinced. It's that people will be allowed to challenge them in public and not have some kind of retaliation. I think that's what it is more. That's what the slap down about Joe Rogan is about. It's basically saying that, like, look, we know that people are going to seek out this information one way or another. You can go download it wherever you want. You can go to Rumble. You can go to Telegram. You know, there's relatively uncensored platforms where things are available. However, it's the kind of making an example out of you. It's the spectacle value of going, you're high profile. Up until this point, you've been reasonably bipartisan. You've had guests from different sides. So we're not going to allow a person who's bipartisan, like who's simultaneously bipartisan, high profile, and not agreeing with us. So we're going to push you into the category of forcing you to be this right-wing person so that half the people will dismiss you. I think that's like what the real threat is just basically allowing someone who's unifying to exist.
Yep.
So that's the lens I'm trying to look at it through, is that any technology or any personality that tries to actually unify perspectives is perceived by a threat by people whose power depends upon maintaining division.
And it's also the perception that he's created a lot of social capital, and he has the most social capital, maybe in the world.
He also has some of the most capital of any podcaster too.
But people trust him. People don't trust him to be right. People just trust him to be Joe Rogan.
Right. To be genuinely wrong.
Yeah.
If he's going to be wrong, at least it's genuinely wrong. It's better than being phony-ass, fake. You don't even know if you're ever right or wrong. You're just in a superposition of truth called phoniness.
Yeah. So there's a perception that the organism has found a new point of created a new point of consensus, and that is Joe Rogan's circulating table of guests. there's a perception that consensus is more bulletproof than CNN and any given mainstream outlet. All I'm really trying to talk about here actually is 12 Angry Men, the movie.
Fill me in on that. I know it's about the American Revolution, right? Isn't it? Right?
No.
It's not? What? It's not about the people who... I always would have assumed it's like... I thought it was like The Patriot or something, where it was like some kind of like romantic story about like... Ben Franklin got fucking pissed one day, and so he called up his friend John whatever.
12 angry founding fathers.
Yeah, and they got together. This is bullshit, and they drafted this thing.
It romanticizes our aspects of our American system.
Okay, what's it about? I'm on a wrong track.
12 Angry Men is a jury.
Oh, okay.
And a jury convenes behind closed doors to decide if a 18-year-old kid whose trial they just sat through is guilty of murder or not. And the movie is 2 hours in that room with those dudes arguing, and they've reached consensus by the end of the film. And I was just reading through Amazon reviews after I watched the movie, and one of the analyses type essays about it was that this is a cross-examination of all the different ways humans create consensus. And you saw, and then I looked back in my memory and was like, oh my gosh, yeah, there was consensus reached by like objective, like singling one person out as the alien, and we all know that the principle he's speaking from is wrong, like racist, for example.
Right.
So that's one way of creating consensus.
Common enemy.
And then there's another kind of consensus that the movie starts with, which is convenience and not wanting to think about something too long.
Oh.
And only one person disagrees with everyone's verdict, and everyone tries to jump on him with peer pressure. So peer pressure and convenience of not having to think very hard is another kind of consensus. And then logic and reason and facts is another way of creating consensus, which is what that single guy at the beginning of the movie has to use. But then he uses emotional appeals occasionally too. And so that's like a strategy he uses that keeps getting shot down throughout the film, because the people who want him to be wrong are trying to use facts to point out his emotional stake in the thing. And what else? Like one guy only tries to keep things light and make jokes about everything. And so that's another way of reaching consensus, is who can he get to make jokes with him in the group. And then there's another kind where one guy just kind of self-appoints himself as the clerk of the thing, just so it can be efficient, and there can be like a director of affairs so they don't waste too much time. And then like his authority gets challenged at one point, and they all like question out loud, like, wait, why is this guy even in charge? And what's fascinating about it is that it gives the effect of spontaneity, that this all happened very intuitively, of just like some people are making decisions like by actually consciously thinking about the room and the people in it and the case before them. Other people are just trying to get out of there as soon as possible. Other people can't even think because they're so blinded by their traumas of their past, which the case reminds them of their trauma.
Interestingly, that's a reason why jurors can be disqualified, is if they have some personal connection, they have some kind of prior history that would, you know what I mean? That's even recognized by the legal system.
Well, I would like to think that 12 Angry Men helped make that happen.
Yeah. When did that movie come out?
57.
Oh, really? Wow. Okay, so it's an old school kind of canonical.
It's one of the best movies I've ever seen. Maybe that's just where my mood is at lately with movies, where I really like things that could be put on a stage and be a theater presentation, but instead are a movie. So with a movie, you can use the tricks of movie making to make it seem like a better product than it is. But with really tight, like theater type performances, there's no special effects to hide behind.
Yeah, because 12 people in a room, how is that not theater? It's literally, you just filmed theater, basically.
Exactly,
Right.
and it completely hinges on the strength of the core of what makes a movie good, which is the script and the story and the actors. And when it's more tight interpersonal drama like that, that's all you have to use to make a good movie is the acting and the script.
It's almost like if you wanted to produce a movie, what you should do first is make like a theater production to where it's just props and you just have characters talking and then from there, create the context and the sets and stuff like that. But
that makes me think of another kind of storyboarding. Like that's one way of storyboarding is to like make theater vignettes of each piece. Another kind is to like have a literal game board.
Interesting.
And have each character or each force, like if it's a monster movie, you have like the monster token represented on the board. And so that's one way to storyboard is like, well, if this scene is over here, like how fast is the monster moving in this other part of the spaceship? And where is he going and why? And so how fast is the piece moving? And what does that do to these other characters who are off screen? That's another way of storyboarding. And I'll try to put a pin on that all with bringing it back to Joe Rogan.
He's creating consensus.
He's created consensus simply by having integrity and telling the truth as much as possible for a really, really long time. And there's just the sheer weight of people who click like on his videos, spiritually or otherwise, because likes and dislikes don't really matter on YouTube anymore, and he's not on YouTube really anymore.
It's probably good that he took that money and left YouTube, because if he probably would have gotten booted off one way or the other.
He needs to take that money again and get off Spotify.
He does.
Censorship cannot be tolerated.
No, it can't be. Censorship leads to people being shot in the streets.
Every passing day he stays on Spotify without getting those episodes back is taking his credibility away from him.
We don't know why he removed those episodes. It might be that the people themselves who were in those episodes requested that they be moved.
No.
You don't think so?
The people themselves are issuing statements about having no one wants their episodes of Joe Rogan taken off.
I could see someone, being afraid that they would be like tarred and feathered by association or something like that.
Not the kinds of people that were
Being
deleted.
really, yeah.
Like Michael Malice had his episodes deleted.
Wait, what?
Yeah.
Michael Malice is like a vaguely left-wing anarchist guy. I don't know if I don't know if he's left-wing. I don't know what you'd call Michael Malice. How, really, Michael Malice? He's like a Twitter dude.
And I know
that's crazy.
And I know that Gad Sad is another one.
Gad Sad. I always thought it was Gad. Gad Sad? That the SAAD guy?
Yeah.
That guy? Okay, yeah, I know that guy. Who is that guy? Is he just like what is he?
He's he's a more ethnic Jordan Peterson, maybe. A brown JP.
An old man that goes at you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh man, that's funny. That's weird. Well, I feel like okay, so I don't know. I maybe I have overly optimistic takes on this whole thing, but I think that like feel like this is kind of just good because it just pushes people to decentralized systems. Like Spotify is called, like there's the idea that like Spotify includes podcasts now, and they made a big thing about launching podcasts. But you know what? Spotify is not podcasting.
And now they've revealed their inability to be a legit podcasting platform.
Like the people who built internet protocols were very smart people, and they knew from the very beginning that you have to have protocols and not platforms. Yet that didn't stop people from moving towards platforms because they were really easy. And then it's like, well, what did you expect was going to happen? You can't have a centralized point you can't have a centralized point in anything that has real significant political import. And, one might think that, well, does everything have to be political? And my answer to that would be that, well, by definition, in some sense, the most important things in media will be political because they're going to be the points of highest leverage. They're going to be the load-bearing structures of narrative.
Well, this is an argument for why John Lennon got murdered. It's because the Beatles became so powerful that it became a political force, what John Lennon thinks is true at any given moment.
Yeah. And so before they couldn't take him off, they couldn't stop people from selling his records. So they just offed the dude.
With Spotify and centralized platforms,
yeah,
I think we en masse are still in the process of creating the consensus that censorship is real and happening. And it's not crazy left wings and harmful people like Alex Jones, which I don't think he is. It literally is a slippery slope thing.
I've told you before about my idea about the slippery slope fallacy,
yes.
Which is the fallacy that the slippery slope is actually a fallacy. It's not a fucking fallacy. It's a demonstrable effect.
Yes, and we're still creating that consensus as a population.
Yeah.
It's still not clear that it's not just crazy right-wingers that are getting censored. It's everyone.
Remember when it was the crazy left-wingers that were getting censored, like a few years ago? Remember when left-wingers were all about free speech? Remember that? That was fucking crazy.
No, I don't remember that anymore.
A lot of people don't seem to remember that. Literally, a lot of people don't seem to remember when, like it was when during Bush, you could have just you could swap out Bush for Biden and swap out a few words in news articles, and you'd have the exact same kind of language about how basically just like blatant craven appeals to authority every day.
Yep.
24/7.
Yep.
Just like it's really weird how fact checkers. Sorry if I'm derailing what you were saying, but I'm going to go on this little side rant about fact checkers again. Fact checking has gone outside of its purview. It was already, like I said before, I think fact-checking just sort of like on the face of it is very embarrassing as a culture that we admit something like that to exist. But like beyond that, I think that fact-checking has started to really stray from its purview semantically even.
Yeah.
Like in the sense that you're not checking facts anymore. You should really call it narrative checking because you're seeing something like, I saw something about the trucker protest or whatever, and it was like, fact check. It was like, I'm paraphrasing, but it was something like, fact check, the truckers in Canada are not working class protests. It's like, according to experts. It's like, oh, so you're saying all these wars we've been fighting, I don't know why I'm talking in Jordan Peterson's voice right now, but all these wars we've been fighting for thousands of years, about to decide what was true in politics, we could just, where were the experts?
Yeah, if only we had experts.
Why didn't Marx just call an expert? Why did he have to write Das Kapital? You know what I mean? Like, it's so much work, Someone already had the answer. Like, it was just an objective fact that, oh, what's working class? Look it up in the dictionary. Oh, okay. Bro, it's embarrassing. It's embarrassing.
It's narrative.
You're not even wrong. I'm embarrassed for you. Like,
it's narrative checking.
It's like,
well said.
But it's like, like, there has to be a lot of people that when they see that are like, oh, okay, so there's this thing going on in the world where, like, if you go along with this, you're gonna eventually feel really like you're gonna be embarrassed at some point for being one of, like, the dumb people who were, like, the last people to realize that you were being treated like a child. Like,
is there anything you're embarrassed about thinking? And
I'm sure there's plenty of things.
Parading as the truth before?
I mean, for, like, when like I told you, I was raised, I used to go around thinking that, like, I used to think, like, sinners were going to go to hell and everything, so,
yeah.
And I just wrote off, like, 80% of the human race, like, oh, man, that
They're
sucks.
going to hell?
Yeah, that, like,
sure.
That's, like, I always thought that it sucked, like, wow, thanks, God, for really fucking this up, but I guess, all right, whatever, I still thought that, like, and I used to, dude, religion's a hell of a drug, man. Of course, I was a teenager, you know, but I think that it's, like, easy, you know, like, in this day and age, you know, in the 2022 now, you know, in the latter, let's say, you know, the most recent decades, it's, you know, religion has been reduced to this thing where, like, most people after they, you know, grow up and get into college or whatever, at some point in your late teens, early 20s, you go like, yeah, probably that's not really true.
Yeah.
Maybe there's, like, some spiritual whatever, but really it's just, like, you know, we don't really know, you know. I'm just going to go with this baseline whatever consensus of modernness. But it's you know, it's hard to remember that, like, you know, back in the few decades ago, that wasn't the case at all. You had full-grown adults. You had 40-year-olds, 50-year-olds that were just, like, zealously in the same mindset as, like, you would only think, like, a teenager who was raised in church would be like today. And so that's a huge thing. And so that was because, in truth, that religion is, even Christianity, you know, institutional Christianity is a hella powerful drug, but we just have so much cultural evolution, and we had, like, a whole cultural revolution that was kind of about that, which gave everyone the tools that were, like, that basically created this culturally sanctioned counter narrative. So you're still buying into a narrative, it's just that you're just taking off the shelf realizations about why this old thing wasn't true. You're not actually creating your own. I think realizing on your own that narratives are not good for you is just as hard as it ever was, except the narratives now are, like, things like, oh, maybe, like, there really is, you know, maybe the media really is full of lies. Maybe the government really is a corrupt institution that is not working for me, and that I'm really going to feel silly a little later with my appeals to authority like this. It's that the state has really stepped into the psychological void. I've never seen this before in my life, having people be so attached to the idea that some type of, like, hierarchical collective mechanism is absolutely necessary to solve all problems, and that if you think that it's, like, you can even see it seeping into, like, comment threads where people say something like on Hacker News, which is literally a board about startup, new ideas, curiosity, thinking for yourself, contrarian, blah, blah, blah. Like, this whole ethos of, like, question everything, you know, Steve Jobs or whatever. Like, this idea that, like, you should take what experts say and then say, like, actually. That's literally the foundational purpose of this news board. And that's why it's one of the best places on the internet that hasn't been, you know, it's one of the last bastions of curiosity. It's still being overrun by, like, shills. But even on that board, there's an increasing number of people who, when you say something like, that's like a take that's, like, about something like medicine, for instance, or, like, space or whatever, you have people that reply, like, I'm so tired of people just, like, thinking that just because they're smart programmers that they know everything about this and this and this and this. And it's like, shouldn't you know, like, thinking you know more than astronomers or engineers or people with PhDs, it's like, whoa,
a slapping down, stay in your lane.
Exactly. The stay in your lane thing is becoming more of a blatant thing where people are not embarrassed to say stay in your lane. Whereas formerly, I remember if you were one of those people who went around telling people to stay in your lane, people would be like, get the fuck out of here.
You know what?
That's like what religious people do, is when you start straying into, if you ask something like, how old do you think the universe is? Or like, what would happen if you just kept going in space? Like, where's the edge? And you start to try to think for yourself. They'd say like, I don't know, man. Philosophers, God, shut up. Let's talk about TV. Like, you're seeing that happen in secular culture.
I'm thinking about how a certain degree of like insanity is required to maintain your integrity in a flawless form now.
Unsanity.
Like it's a reasonable thing this month that Joe Rogan did to issue a relative kind of apology / explanation for unsavory things he's appeared to have said in the past. And that's a reasonable thing because he fancies himself a kind person to issue a video like that, but it only plays into the hands of bad actors who want to destroy him. People who already like and respect him have no use for an explanation of why he's a dumbass. We know he's a dumbass. He's also an amazing person, and we don't need apologies. Because a lot of people who listen to him think for themselves, and they understand that they can listen to someone without taking... But so, like, a level of insanity is required to take the amount of heat that, for example, Joe Rogan this month in 2022 has taken, and to just shrug it off. Like, one of the only people we've seen in recent years who's been able to do that is Trump. And he's able to do that for reasons of, like, so much ego-centeredness that it seems like a mental illness almost. But, like, it seems like about that much self-certainty is what's required to move forward without apologizing. And this kind of corrosive acid of self-censorship that's in the culture right now, the same way that vaccines are going to selectively create new variants of COVID that are outside of the vaccine, this corrosive gas of self-censorship is going to selectively create more insane people.
That's a really good point.
And I'm one of them. I have no need to apologize for things, so we'll see if pressure from the world ever comes down on me. We'll see how I react then.
Cancel culture created Trump.
It did, yes.
Because basically the system that you have in place is like the leaders, or let's not even say leaders, but the prominent members of a group are a function of the metrics by which, or the mechanisms, the mechanics of how the group raises people to prominence. And if one of those metrics is basically selecting out people who can't stand up to criticism for whatever reason.
If to censor people you use compassion for others against those people to censor them, then you're going to create a new group of people who have zero compassion for others, because that's the only way to survive in this public sphere.
Basically, every time anyone ever fucks up, you go, you're an asshole, and fuck you, and you don't have any forgiveness, you don't have any give and take, you don't have any basic, gentlemanly civility towards people, you're going to get people who are just unrepentant assholes and don't care and do whatever they want anyway. And it's, though, what you said about yourself being someone like that, I don't think of you as an asshole. I think of you as someone who doesn't apologize, but maybe for different reasons.
People do, though.
Of course they do.
People
yeah, because that's the interface layer.
See me as an asshole.
Of course they do.
As a self-centered,
it's
all those things.
It's sort of like, maybe in some sense actually that there's a silver lining to cancel culture, because what it does is it's sort of like cancel culture is kind of ironically an equal opportunity provider for assholes and people who just have a lot of integrity, and they might seem the same to people who are trying to cancel them, but
it's going to lift both of those classes of people up. So like complete insane narcissists and people with flawless integrity, both.
Isn't that okay? You know what's crazy? This is really crazy. Okay, look at this. Literally, nature wins. Okay, so check this out. I just realized this is fucking mind blowing. Okay, so the whole, how do you pronounce that thing in French? Like raison d'être or whatever. It's like RAISOND. It's raison d'être. Like the reason for existing. There's some French phrase that I can't pronounce that I wish I could. That is like the reason for existing for cancel culture is that, whether anyone admits it or not, is the idea that like it's not worth it to take the good. It's not worth it to take the bad in order to get the good. It's like the idea, because the people who support free speech say like, well, we have to. There's geniuses and there's charlatans.
And you gotta accept that some of the bad is there if you want any of the good.
Yeah, if you want the Einsteins to be able to get their ideas out, you gotta let the Alex Jones or whoever it is you think is the opposite of an Einstein, whatever. That's people who are kind of pro cancel culture are like saying, well, we don't. That bargain's not worth it. Yeah, it'd be great to have smart people, but there's all this misinformation. It's too dangerous. We can't do this. So we're gonna selectively try to keep the bad people down according to our definition. Mm-hmm. So okay, all right. But what's ironic about that is that you're still going to get a mix of the good and the bad, except there's just going to be more extreme versions of both.
Yep.
So what you're doing is you're just taking, instead of having a spread out distribution of good and bad on both ends, you're going to have a really extreme distribution, a really tight distribution where there's going to be fewer people with much stronger opinions.
Right.
And some of those people might be really amazing people because they withstood your attempts to cancel them, and some of them might be really shitty people because they just had the ability to withstand. It's like, hey, you can't. I'm already at the bottom, man. What are you going to take away from me?
Right.
I'm an asshole. People love me. Just keep telling me an asshole. It's just helping. It's helping my brand at this point.
Right.
And I think that's the point at which things get a little squirrely, because if you can't, what this cancel culture is doing is it's breeding a kind of person who is immune to criticism.
Yes.
And if you are a Machiavellian, bad-intentioned person who is immune to criticism, that's, at some point, let's say they really are a bad person. At that point, the only way to stop them is through the fallback consensus mechanism, which is some kind of violent action. Mm-hmm. Because you're so by creating this extreme ecosystem, by creating this thing where you have to have a lot of integrity or a lot of don't give a fuck, you're basically making people who potentially you're taking discourse off the table as a means of conflict resolution in doing that, and you're not stopping the emergence of the characters who you were afraid of in the first place, who are going to say things that you don't agree with. You're just making it to where you can't talk to them anymore, and no one can really talk to each other, and there's this pervasive sense that you just have to kind of shout over each other. I really think that shouting is kind of like a precursor to violence. It's like a moving in the direction away from talking. Like if you think of nonviolent communication on one end and clubbing each other on the other end, mm-hmm. Shouting is somewhere in the middle of that spectrum between those two mm-hmm. endpoints. People being spoon-fed propaganda on Reddit's front page, trying to kind of like this signaling about what the approved narrative was. I had this point about propaganda being somewhat unsophisticated. Examples of it that I've seen being kind of unsophisticated, specifically about the trucker protests, how they're kind of being tarred as Nazis, and if you actually watch the videos, it's it's little kids and fucking Yeah,
it's a very Canadian situation.
I just love that Canadians are Nazis too. I thought Canada was a bunch of unicorns and socialists. Nah, apparently they're all Nazis. Anyway, whatever. I don't even care about that. My point about it was that like the propaganda doesn't seem like super convincing, and so I was wondering, like, I wonder how many people are just like on Reddit and they're like, oh, okay, yeah, I guess I honestly probably think these people are not Nazis. So I'm not really convinced by this propaganda that they're actually Nazis, but I am convinced that if I don't pretend to think that, other people are going to think that I'm not against Nazis or something. And so like, it's like communicating, it's like not trying to convince you to think something, it's trying to convince you that your friends think something. And it's making it to where it's just saying basically it's propaganda that's going like, hey, okay, here's the socially acceptable opinion, take it or leave it, but this is the socially acceptable opinion. You have to at least act like you think this. And that's like kind of propaganda that accomplishes the same thing, that because it's creating the illusion of consensus. Like you don't even need to create consensus. You just have to convince people to pretend like they're in consensus, which is very Soviet, you know. It's like this kind of unreality, hyper-normalization type thing. But my point was that you said something really interesting, because I asked, like, I had this thought, like, what would it be like to just not have this idea in your life that you were afraid of something, that you were afraid of that you were scanning the environment for socially acceptable opinions to try them on, and like, what would it be like to just have an aesthetic of trying to be like perfectly genuine in every moment? Like, what would that be like? And you had this, you responded, a face without fear, pain, or guilt, a quiet nobility that looks forward into existence. So, can you elaborate on that? Presumably this is a Rand quote, which...
A face without fear or pain or guilt is a Rand quote.
Yeah.
And then I went on with my own words of a person who has a quiet nobility about them, meaning they hold themselves with respect that doesn't need anyone else to approve or disapprove of their respect. It's not performative, it's natural, the way a deer has a quiet nobility to it.
Yeah.
But it becomes more than instinct, and it becomes something more like nobility when it's a man or a woman adopting that posture, because it requires mental effort and fulfilling your own values physically to achieve that self-respect in spite of cultural recommendations to the opposite. So it's more than an animal instinct rightness within the universe. It's an achieved nobility of I know why, I personally know why I'm right, or I have a place in the universe. What else is there to say about that? Do
you have moments where you feel like that?
Where I feel like what?
Where you feel like you have that feeling of nobility?
Yeah.
What do you feel like is the point that you're like pushing on in order to raise yourself to that level? Because like, if I'm thinking of the contrast between, like, the way I've been thinking about this is like the difference between being someone who's like the difference between nobility and hubris, or nobility and whatever the negative version of nobility is, whatever words you want to use for that. What makes nobility positive is that you're not using other people as the shadow to define yourself. You're
So-
using some.
what
else?
am I
Yeah,
using
what are
as
you
the shadow?
using? What are you thinking of as like the bad, so that you can become the good? In that state, is it like weakness itself, or?
Most immediately, my will to suicide.
That's the thing that you're rejecting.
That's the edge that provides me with a real felt sense of victory every passing day. More potently when I'm in a bad mood.
Yeah. Right.
And bad, I mean like archetypally bad, like
Right.
suicidal bad. Like in those moments, to progress to the next day, to progress to the next artistic, creative achievement is of a level of like Homer's Iliad level heroism.
Because it really has nothing to do with other people. It's
The strength to go on has come from nowhere but within.
yeah.
And so it's come from somewhere that's actually dependable and will grow the more I use it. And so it's not just heroism that's saved me, it's heroism that now has more power to save me and others in the future because I succeeded that day. In terms of today's climate of self-censorship and being a sheep for reasons of blending into the herd, in my modern adult life, I started forming my philosophy about this off Terence McKenna's words, where his stress was often on personal experience.
Yeah.
And he said things like, culture is your enemy.
Culture's not your friend. Yeah.
Yes, culture is not your friend, is what he said. And he says things like, your personal experience is the golden ticket, and that's all you have. And whatever kind of identity, whatever kind of life you're gonna make, it's got to have your own actual experience at its center.
Yeah.
You can't export the responsibility to look at the world with your own eyes onto other people.
Yeah.
You have to look at the world yourself and come to your own conclusions about it.
Yeah, he has this whole, there's some really funny quote about that.
And he was pointing out this
Yeah.
inviolable validity. Are you experiencing it? Then that's a kind of truth that is untouchable even by scientifically verified truth. Even scientifically verified truth is like, it's really fucking good, but it's not as good as the present moment that you're having right now.
I was very inspired by that too, actually. I remember that was one of the things about Terence McKenna that I thought was that really changed my perspective, is that I stopped looking at experience and all of the content of the human mind and of human culture and everything as some kind of ephemeral afterthought that was just kind of interesting, I guess, but the real world was like physics and math and stuff. I started seeing those things on equal footing with each other, where it's all real, and direct experience is the realest of the real, and that there's almost a kind of like an ethos around that idea that it's the realest thing because it's what you should be paying attention to. He has some quote about like, I think like if you're thinking about, this was in the 90s, he's like, if you're thinking about Bill Clinton or Michael Jackson or whatever, you're kind of missing the point. What's real is your close friends and associations, your highs, your orgasms, your personal fuck-ups and triumphs and stuff like that. And I can't remember how he ended it, but it was like, if you're thinking about all this, there's a system that's trying to just turn you into a half-baked moron consuming media produced out of the bones of a dying world or something like that. There's some really, really powerful, quippy way of saying that. That really deeply resonated with me. That's interesting. You connect that to the idea of nobility.
Well, it doesn't come naturally in a to a person raised in this culture today.
No.
It doesn't come naturally to put yourself first. And by yourself, I mean the node of direct experience.
Yeah.
It doesn't come naturally to form all your principles with that at the top of the pyramid. And so you have to try it for yourself and experience the stability and adaptability and untouchable integrity of that lifestyle for yourself, so that it can be a philosophy that's actually based on experience. That takes time and that takes effort. And that is a way in which 2020 and this cataclysm we're living through has been really great for me. I've never experienced such nobility of self as I have these last 2 years.
You feel like you're running your own code?
And I have more objective proof of its stability than I didn't even imagine anything could be this stable. And it feels like my poem of the Great Leap. It feels like taking a leap of faith out into the air, and it turns out your wings can carry your weight. And it's not about staying in a safe place. Stability is about going up to a place of risk and jumping out there and doing your best in regular intervals over time, so you get stronger and stronger.
That makes me think of another Terence McKenna.
McKenna?
McKenna. I said McKenna because I was going to say McKenna quote. Another quote by the McKenna.
McKenna is some kind of amazing new website we gotta make.
It's just you know what? There's already like 1,000 websites about McKenna quotes. Half of them fake, half of them real.
But McKenna is something like with the quill pen, and you have to make your own McKenna quotes to be part of the website.
It's an AI that's just like produces McKenna quotes. No, he said something about the secret or like the joke or something like that is that you leap into the abyss and you discover that it's a feather bed, and it's very Great Leap-esque. The idea that your fear of jumping is the worst part about jumping when you actually jump in comparison to how afraid you were.
Well, you've got a nobility of self to you, Stuart, that makes you one of the handful of trustworthy people I know about in my life. And it's about the way I word it in my mind, if it occurs to me, is that your actions line up with your words.
That's true.
Are they amazing actions? Are they amazing words? Like, that's a shifting thing.
That's
sometimes they're more amazing than other times.
Yeah.
But the words and the actions line up with each other.
That's true.
And turns out that that's a pretty rare thing for me in my life. And I take responsibility for that. That's because it's only a recent phenomenon that I've been conscious of my words lining up with my actions. And when you are corrupted yourself in that way, then the people around you are going to reflect that. But as of now, you are one of the few people whose words do line up with their actions.
Probably because my actions are really simple. I think if I had a lot more complicated trade-offs to make all the time, it could get a lot squirrelier. But as it is right now, I'm just working on satellite, which is the main, it's like the thing, it's like the Mount Olympus in my mind that I've been looking at that for years, just trying to walk toward it. And so my words are basically, that's what I'm doing. And I don't, when I get there, it's going to be real interesting, because I'm going to have to, I almost think that I'm so kind of locked in to being single-minded about things that at some point I'll probably have to examine, or maybe I never will.
You're gonna
I don't know.
have to extract the Mount Olympus principle out of satellite so that you can make things bigger than satellite. If you don't, then you're never going to finish satellite, because if you do, then that's the end of having a focus. So you're going to have to abstract the principle of having a transcendent focus out of the one surface level focus that you have right now.
I had this waking dream a couple nights ago where I woke up at like 5 a.m. and I was just laying awake, and I had this really profound thought about, like, I was like, okay, so maybe everyone is the same person, assuming that's true, you know, that like there's this ephemeral, there's a top layer of the world, there's like the world of matter and flesh and blood and rocks and bones and faces and, you know, all that stuff like that. But like behind your eyes, there's like a little tendril of light, a little golden tendril or something that's like just peering out, and then it kind of goes down, and it's not like down, but it goes back, it goes inward, and it connects back to this big blob of that self, whatever. Okay, so we're all trees in the same branches in the same tree, whatever, that idea, the hippie thing, we're all connected. Okay, so I was like, all right, so I was really feeling that in this dream, and I was thinking, when I look into the eyes of like Alicia, oh, I can see that. Yeah, it's me, because there's not a lot of distance between us, very little. When I look at my friends, I can see that too. I look at my parents, I can see that, because I'm naturally set up to see that in those relationships where I've swept away a lot on the wind, I've cleaned the glass, so to speak. You know, myself, I didn't even used to see that with myself. At some point, I realized, I looked inside myself and I saw that, oh yeah, I'm everything. At some point, I'm the avatar of whatever's going on here. I'm this, you know. So that's not, you know. My point is that I'm starting from this supposition that like we have something in common with each other. And then I thought about like, what about like the warrior ethos? What about the fact that there's struggle and conflict, and that if I really took that idea seriously, the people I'm fighting against are also that. And if I really could look into their eyes too, I'd see, you know, the beloved, for lack of a better word. And if that's true, is there any place in the world for, like, is there a place for this warrior ethos, this idea that you will fight for what you believe is true, you know, metaphorically or otherwise? And in this dream, I realized how there is a kind of way of like fighting while also still being in love and having this profound respect for the person you're fighting. And like you can do the right thing and still know, and not do it from a place of malice. You can do it from a place of knowing that deep down, you and your enemies are on the same side, so to speak, and that side is called future, more expansion, growth, because that requires conflict. This drama that we're having, like I want to make sure, I want to try to. It's like this idea of nobility, almost like nobility of action, there can be nobility even in conflict, and you don't have to hate your enemy to fight them. You can fight them for a different reason. Yeah.
I think hatred is still important, for me at least it is. I'm coming from a place of self-censoring my sense of hatred, and so it only came out in unconscious and ugly and immature ways. And because I try to consciously wield and own my hatred now, I'm able to take in that philosophy you just said to expand my experience of it when I'm having it. That the hatred can be a tool of communication, but it's a double-edged sword that does keep me bound to the object of my hatred. Well, I think I think there's unifying principles underneath everything and everyone, but I do think every single person is different. I believe in an infinite God, and there is plenty of room in the power of an infinite God to create infinite variegations of completely unique souls. And there can even be like a unified world peace planet of universal brotherhood, but that could only be a healthy organism by way of each brother and sister being a completely unique node in that system, and otherwise it's a totalitarian dystopia.
Yeah.
You want the differences. You want the variations. You would love Alicia less if she truly was you and not Alicia.
Yeah,
the love would run out if getting to the bottom of the well of her soul, you didn't find something
that I didn't already have. Yeah.
If you didn't find something basically her, that can never be you.
Right.
Because it's always going to branch into some uniquely Alicia place.
Yeah. It's almost like that's why the universe exists or something. Like, I think that maybe just to what you're saying, like if we didn't, there's probably a reason why we need to be individuals on some level. There has to be a purpose for that, because otherwise why wouldn't the infinite consciousness just stay there?
Mm-hmm.
Why would it do anything if there wasn't something to be gained from splitting itself up like that?
And that happens in the end of Ghost in the Shell.
Really?
The puppet master needs to breed with Major Motoko, so that his passing on of his genes isn't an infinite cloning of the puppet master protocol, because that's not evolutionarily stable.
Right.
He needs to merge with a physical kind of mere but feminine but very personable, unique, different version of himself,
right,
to create a third thing that neither of them can anticipate and is going to go way beyond either of their expectations about what it is. That third being is totally different from the two progenitors. You don't want your kid to be you.
I don't want my kid to be me. That would be that would get a little bit boring. I feel like I would I think there's something about conflict that it reminds me of this thing that Alan Watts had this. He was telling a story about Jung, about how Jung had this idea that evil and conflict, he was talking, this was about World War II, because that was, Jung's time, that Jung had this comparison to the fight that, in human affairs between good and evil, that from some perspective, that was like this, how the spider and the wasp fight each other, how it's part of the natural order. And Alan Watts was talking about how a lot of people accused Jung of having Nazi sympathies because he made that comparison, and he pointed out that good and evil is itself a part of nature. And
that's why he was rejected by the church of the faith he grew up in.
Oh, is that what it was? Yeah, that makes sense.
He never had the approval of the church, even though he himself aggressively pursued a spiritual relationship with Jesus Christ. He was never accepted by the church because
he tried to integrate.
Because he was unwilling to do away with Satan and do away with the demon within.
So basically he got canceled for trying to unify perspectives.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, that's it's funny how that just keeps playing out. I think that there's a kind of nobility in taking the thing you're fighting against and realizing that, like, you're what you're doing is you're fighting against an avatar of that thing. But really, it's this much deeper striving toward the perfect, the good. It's like you see the surface layer of the bad guys, but those bad guys are avatars of something that you have latent within you, but you don't have it expressed. And you're like, really, that what everyone should do is what they personally believe is right. Are they going to disagree? Absolutely. Does that mean that either one of them is doing the wrong thing? I don't think so. Like, I think if you're doing evil, but you think you're doing good, you're not really doing evil. You're just taking a longer path on the way to good. It's
Sure.
like maybe doing evil is just basically giving up and saying, I'm not playing this game. And then it just takes longer for everyone else because you're refusing to do your part. You're refusing to act from your own will, and you want to subscribe to the centralized server to get consensus.
So the meta good you're pointing out there is to accept the school of life and always be a student, no matter what age you are. Your principles still have room to grow. Your morals still have room to grow. There's always more to learn. And you learn from the school of life by actively engaging in it.
Yeah, the meta good is saying yes to yourself and accepting the consequences.
Yeah.